Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I think thank you to Louise and thank you to the BIFAD members for having us. Before I speak a little bit, I want to share with you, as Louise said, a video that shows some of the research. So I hope you enjoy it, and it'll give you a little bit of an introduction into what the points I'll speak to about after. So maybe we'll just roll the video to start.
This Youth Livelihoods Diaries research is being done in Uganda and in Ghana. The respondents are 18 to 24 years old. This research has been designed to challenge preconceived ideas about youth livelihood. One of the big learnings is that practically everybody is juggling a lot of different income streams. There's almost nobody who's just focusing on one single way of earning a living. This mixed livelihoods is almost an identity. One of the biggest surprises of the research is that when we ask straight off to youth, would you prefer to have your own business or would you prefer to have stable employment? 2/3 at least would prefer to have their own business.
Woba olikola eyo ofuna buli kana ku ssente buli ssaawa aye ya gavumenti olindira bya mwezi ne wafuna esente. Kati nga nze Somalia eddembe lyempulira lyenfuna mu kulima nfuna esente nafuna emmere buli kimu nakifuna.
You see over time their relationship to agriculture shifting a little bit. When they're 15 they will vouch, I will never rely on agriculture for my income. And then after experiencing how difficult the alternatives are, they realize that the way their parents live might still be an option for them as well. So you see the older youth are more focused on agriculture.
Nkuba kwa matafali, nsima kwa omukyanga, ndikola emirimu gyonna sobola okufuna esente edinansobozesa okwaya ebintu byange byendikwenda nga enkoko, embuzi n'ente. Okusomesebwa kwendi kunako kutono n'ensonga lwaki era nkayenda okusomesebwako okusingawo mu nkoko n'ente.
It's important to listen to young people and get their views because young people know themselves better than anyone else. And if you ask these young people, you're able to get evidence-based information. Young people have different jobs and they really love doing different jobs. Young people are not lazy. Young people in Africa are working.
If we harness the potential of all young people in Africa, we'll be able to support them to get decent living, to get reasonable income, and to build their lives and to build their nations.
So this is a project that we want to speak about, as Louise said, that was really the foundation, the MasterCard Foundation, trying to understand better what youth livelihoods are composed of. In general, we looked at activities across a variety of formal, informal sectors, agriculture, non-agricultural work. It was really a qualitative assessment using a diaries methodology, which I'll explain a bit, to really understand how young people in rural areas of Ghana and Uganda are making their lives. What are their livelihoods composed of? So one of the differences with this study was that we wanted to look at youth who weren't part of a development program per se. I mean, we did recruitment, we asked, are you part of any program? It wasn't a screening criteria, but really these are just, everyday young people in these rural areas, weren't necessarily, selected because they're already in a program. And that really, we tried to get a picture of what young people were doing in their everyday lives. So before I get started, I'll tell you a little bit about the MasterCard Foundation for those of you who haven't maybe heard of us. We're relatively new. We're established in 2006 by MasterCard International through the generosity of its board when it did an initial public offering. They set aside a portion of the initial public offering to establish the foundation. And our vision is a world where everyone has the opportunity to learn and prosper. And early on, our board of directors made a strategic decision to focus on Africa. So we're focused primarily in sub-Saharan Africa, and although we have some programs initially that were in other areas of the world, going forward, our strategy is firmly focused on Africa. And we are based in Toronto, Canada, and we just opened our first African office in Kigali, and we hopefully will have more coming as well. And we're only 98 employees, so you're seeing 1% of the foundation right here in front of you. So we run a pretty lean operation. So thus far, we've reached over 25 million people in the past 10 years. We've committed over $2 billion, and we're currently working in 33 countries. And I'll speak more later about our strategy going forward, but we are going to be focusing our efforts on 10 countries in Africa going forward. So in 2016, we had our 10th anniversary, and 2017 was really a year of strategy and reflection for us. So I'm going to speak to this later, but this research was a big part of our strategy process in looking at how young people are making their livelihoods. We do have a significant investments in agriculture already. So we work with the Fund for Rural Prosperity, which is a $50 million challenge fund we set up on financial products and reaching smallholder farmers with financial products. We run the Rural and Agricultural Finance Learning Lab, which brings together our knowledge and learning around financial services for the agriculture sector. And we also have a significant portfolio of projects focused on youth employment and youth in agriculture, including the Youth Forward initiative, which is in Ghana and Uganda. So as you've already seen slides about this morning, but for a foundation that's squarely focused on Africa, we're of course very much top of mind thinking about the youth employment challenge. And this is really driving our strategy going forward. I'll speak to that in a little bit. But we see that Africa is the youngest and fastest growing continent in the world. And by 2050, a quarter of the world's population will be African. By the end of this century, almost half of the world's young people will be African. And we see this as a huge employment challenge. So the need to produce thousands of jobs every day for young people coming on the labor market in Africa is front of mind. And we see that agriculture is central to many young people's livelihood strategies, and thus we think a lot of the solutions need to meet young people where they're at. So what did we want to learn? We had a hypothesis that mixed livelihoods was the way that young people were earning their livelihoods. And this came out of a lot of the learning from projects and programs we were doing. People were telling us, young people, they're not devoting the 50 hours a week. We need them to be in this training program. They're off doing other things. So this was coming out of our projects, but we said we need to understand this better. And by mixed livelihoods, we really were looking at, putting various activities together to make a living and combining different kinds of activities. But we didn't understand this fully. So we wanted to understand how our mixed livelihoods integrated into young people's lives, what livelihood approaches do young people use in their day-to-day lives, and how do these things differ between young women and young men? How about different countries or different regions? We couldn't tackle everything, so we just zeroed in on 2 countries for this research. And then the big so what question for us is how do we design interventions that address these realities, that meet young people where they're at and actually try to make a difference? So this is very youth-centered research. We were working in Ghana in the Upper East region, close to Navrongo in the northern border. You can see that on the slide. There's a little orange dot. In Uganda, we were more in the lake region, close to Jinja. And we worked with participants aged 18 to 24. We really saw it as crucial to engage young people in this research, and I'm so pleased to see the panel this afternoon involving young people here as well. And really congratulations to the organizers and thank you to the youth participants for being here, and that's really central to how we operate at the foundation as well. So we had youth researchers interviewing other youth about their livelihoods. And they'd go out with smartphones and, so it's very tech enabled. And every 2 weeks they'd meet with the young people as part of the research and they'd answer a questionnaire. What have you been doing the last 2 weeks? What income have you earned? What activities have you done? Have you been saving any money? Did you get any gifts? You know, there were a whole series of questions that they answered every 2 weeks. And then we always had a special questionnaire too, and this is where the young people, you'd see that in the video, but they loved having their opinion asked, you know? You want to know what I think. This is great. And especially in places where sometimes young people's opinions aren't listened to, aren't valued, maybe put down a little bit more in their communities. They were at the center of this research. We also were able to use video and participatory photography. So every week, the young person who was participating in the research got to take the cell phone from the interviewer and take a picture of something that mattered to their lives, and that actually became a very vibrant and participatory part of the research. We were actually really happy that only 22 people dropped out of the research in the whole year, which showed what a meaningful process it was. Those of you involved in social science research will know that attrition is a huge problem. So we oversampled, of course, right? That's why you see 122 and 124 participants. We wanted to end up with 100 at the end of the year. And over a whole year, we only lost 22 people, and most of them were migrating, the internal displacement issue. So we actually, you know, found that the research was really meaningful and beneficial to the young people themselves. So who did we include in the research? They were recruited through community engagements. We worked with a couple of youth development organizations and met with the local elders and really tried to promote the research in those communities. They were self-selected, and then they were screened on their suitability for diaries. Were they willing to be part of this? Were they available for some of the time? Were they comfortable discussing personal issues? And we were trying to balance the number of women and men we had in the study, as well as those who were in school and out of school. So as you can see, we and this is in the reports. I believe the BIFAD members have this in your briefing book. And the report is available online for anyone who wants to see it as well on the MasterCard Foundation website. So we're really trying to, you know, strike a balance between some of those sampling issues. Interestingly enough, in Ghana, even though we were working with young people who are pretty young, you know, 18 to 24 is a pretty young youth cohort. In Ghana, 30% of them already had children. And in Uganda, 46% of them already had children. So you really see the young age of parenthood and how already at a young age people are managing, you know, raising their own children and families. And what we found was over the whole year, these youth were not part of any formal development programming. No extension agents, no programs, no training programs, nothing. Okay, so what did we find? We found that young people have diverse livelihoods that really include agriculture as a central component. Again, these are pretty rural areas. So this is a graph, and I only pulled out one country, I think, because it wasn't going to fit on a slide. But in the report itself, there are 2 countries. But this is all the respondents. Each respondent is a vertical bar. And the different colors are different kinds of activities. So crops and horticultural, so gardening, raising livestock. And then there's the red parts is wage employment. You can see that's less, much less, like earning some money. And then entrepreneurship is green. So you can see the vast majority of the bar graphs, and on the left axis is reported activities. So every one of those every 2-week surveys that they completed, they're like checking off which activities they were doing in the last 2 weeks. And so we have an activity count for the whole year. We were also able to map it over seasons because it was a 12-month project, and to look at when did different activities peak and other ones decline. And what we get is a picture of just doing all sorts of different kinds of things. So they're doing crops. They're raising cash crops for money and also for food. They're raising livestock. You can see livestock is a big part of it, the orange blocks. There's also horticulture, so their own little garden activities. And what we really found was they diversified their agricultural production as a way to help manage the seasonality, income fluctuations, and really to manage risk. This was a risk mitigation approach. So a diversified portfolio of crops and livestock ensured that young people minimized the risk of devastating losses due to weather or price unpredictability. So used to be, we often in development programs, we tell young people specialize, specialize, specialize. And actually what they're doing is diversifying as a way to manage different risks. So we saw that agricultural production is central to rural young people's livelihoods. Like a lot of people, we are trying to emphasize the opportunities in different points along the agricultural value chain. And I think that does work for some young people, and we're looking closely at how to maximize those opportunities. But at the end of the day, a lot of young people in Africa, the vast majority, are still focused on agricultural production. So this is the average number of agricultural activities, so the number of different kinds of things that people are doing. So the last slide was talking about the different buckets, right? So there's livestock, there's crops, there's horticulture, there's wage things. Now, even within those activities, there's a lot of people who are doing like 5 different kinds of crops, or 6 different kinds of crops, or 3 different kinds of livestock, so they're not specializing in just chickens or just goats. It's about, again, diversifying even within those categories. But one of the things we were really intrigued with was how much young people express interest in agriculture. And this is something that the video goes into even more. People said, I want to do agriculture. The report shows that young people across both Ghana and Uganda are engaged in on-farm activities such as working on the family farm, casual laborers on other people's farm, or informally selling agricultural products. Okay, so now we asked the question, we had a lot of information too about how much money had come into these young people's pocketbooks over the year. And we asked ourselves the question, who was most successful and why? And I put up the graphs there, and I put in the red line of $1,000 USD, and this is per year. So this is gross annual income. This is all the money reaching their pockets reported to us over a year. And as you can see, the distribution patterns are pretty similar, and just because of weird statistical programs, the scales aren't quite the same between the two, so forgive that. But what we found was young people faced considerable difficulties in finding consistent activities to generate income. As you can see, they didn't make a lot of money. A lot of these young people are less than $2 a day, and this is working really hard. And they're right at the per capita kind of poverty thresholds that we see in a lot of the development literature and poverty measurement approaches. They reported struggling to find ways to remain economically active. And there were especially acute fluctuations in the availability of paid work. So anyone who was at the upper end of those distribution patterns, especially the people who went over $1,000 for the year, they were the ones who managed to find some sort of wage employment, whether it was, working in a little shop or, paid labor on somebody's farm. A bit of paid labor were the ones that really put people at the higher end. But the vast majority didn't have those opportunities. So some of our key findings, and here you have a kind of a framework that we used. I think there was a question earlier about kind of social activities, and this is something we asked a lot about as well. I haven't gone into it too much in this presentation, but we came up with this kind of 4-part conceptual understanding of what composed rural youth livelihoods. So at the top left there, you have agricultural production. That's a lot of the things I've talked about today, given the nature of this topic today and your interest. We also saw entrepreneurship activities, so running a small little shop or business. Then the employment, as I said, the bottom right, which was really, I think, often the weakest link for these young people. And then we also had social, and this had real economic implications, because it created this network of opportunities, both to have, borrow some money from a family member or a friend to co-invest in a little venture. It provided access to some of that capital. It also had obligations. So young people would be obligated to contribute to their families and households in a monetary way, or would have, it's just the network of reciprocity and opportunities that were part of their social lives. So we concluded that, yes, young people's livelihoods are incredibly diverse, actually more diverse than we ever expected to find. But we also found that agricultural production is still very central to rural young people's livelihoods, but the incomes are really meager. So given the lack of high productivity and the lack of those kind of opportunities, we still find them very meager. And formal and informal wage employment is very rare and sporadic or even elusive. So and a lot of people said, yes, of course I'd love a formal sector job, but that just isn't going to happen. And if our strategies and our programming is just focused on getting a few people into great, formal sector jobs, that isn't going to reach the millions. That isn't going to help us scale to meet the demographic challenge I already outlined. We also concluded that many young people are invisible to development agencies and programs, even to their own governments. They weren't reached by extension agents, they weren't reached by training programs or, finance or input support. These things didn't reach at least the young people we spoke to. And so our conclusion is we need to do better. So we conclude that system-wide interventions are key to reaching young people at scale. Just the nature of the challenge requires us to think of bigger solutions that reach more young people. So my last slide is really talking a little bit about what we at the Foundation took out of this research. And I'm just, it does my researcher heart no end of good. It thrills me to pieces to see this influence our work so much. Not that it was the only factor going into it, but it was a contributing part of it. So as I said at the outset, we aim to improve the quality of education and vocational training. We're also so basically we set out and we said, what do we want to do over our next 10 years? We're 10 years old as a foundation, what do we want to do? And we said that we're going to work on one central challenge, which is youth unemployment in Africa. So that's our full goal for the next 10 years. And we are aiming to reach 30 million youth by 2030, 30 million youth in jobs. And so we want to do that a couple different ways. One is by looking at the quality of education and vocational training, so looking at the supply side of the labor market equation, making sure young people have the right skills for the right jobs. We also want to connect employers and job seekers. But also at the other end of the spectrum, we want to enable entrepreneurs and small businesses to expand through access to financial services. So we're really thinking about different mechanisms around supply and demand and linkage in the labor market. So as I said, we'll be focusing on 10 countries going forward. We've already launched our Rwanda initiative. We're going to be focusing a lot more on young women and gender. And we hope to work more directly with African organizations going forward. And a big part of what we're doing is also using technology and working on sharing the evidence base. We're committed to learning about our programs and conducting more research that can really drive knowledge about what works in different circumstances and that really works with young people themselves. So I think that's it for me.
Thank you. We are almost at break point. We have time for a few quick questions of Tricia Williams from MasterCard. If anybody would like to ask them, I see Arsalan over there. Let's start with Pamela, and then we go to Arsalan, and then we have one back there and one there. And Tricia, I'll just, and then we'll take those four, and then Tricia will respond, and then we'll go to break.
Thank you for that presentation, Tricia. Hi, right here.
Oh, thank you.
Hi. When Louise opened, one of the points that she was making is that part of this agenda is about the transition from youth into prosperous adulthood. There was a report about 8 years ago by the Chicago Council, authored by Catherine Bertini. It was called Girls Grow. And one of the real messages that hit me from that report was that when we talk about gender, it was almost a plea, start looking younger. That 18 in that age range is probably too late already. And one of the projects that they were reporting on was something, I believe was in Kenya, where they were getting girls involved with livestock young, and the income and the engagement was delaying marriage, keeping them in school, helping that transition, which is a real problem set. And so it's just sort of a general commentary about how early we're actually engaging the youth, and maybe we need to go younger, especially with the women.
Yeah. Okay. Aslihan, next table.
Thanks, Tricia, for the very
nice presentation and the video. Two quick questions. I noticed that you've used the UN definition of youth, 18 to 24, and as far as I know, most African countries go up to 35 when they talk about youth, including African Union official definition. So I was wondering the specific reason for sticking to the 18 to 24. And the other one is related to the conclusion that you made about the vocational training, improving the quality of vocational training. I didn't quite understand, what types of maybe questions were asked related to that. So how did you draw that conclusion from these two bi-weekly activity surveys? And if you could just tell us more, but that would be nice. Thanks.
Okay, we have one back there.
Okay. Trisha, my name is Monica Dorhai here. I wanted to thank MasterCard Government Relations. I work with them, I think, for about 12 years. Thank you, thank you. And since you launched, I was invited, and I'm pleased and honored. I work in the banking industry last 18 years. And you've done several events as MasterCard Foundation here in Washington. My question to you, and my lesson, is that now there is a vacuum of experts in Washington from Democratic administration to Republican. It's a real deal for companies to understand how MasterCard Foundation, and my appeal to you is also to MasterCard Government Relations to stay very engaged. And if you can come, do come to Washington as much as you can. USAID got a lot of cuts in the budget, and they will continue to get cuts. And MasterCard Foundation is a supporter because you collaborate. So you really need to stay engaged with them. And if you can, what are your events coming up to support and engage in Washington, D.C.? I know you're in Toronto, but Washington, D.C. matters. So.
Okay, we have two more. Okay. I guess we have three more. I'm going to ask each of you 1 minute, please. 1 minute.
Okay, no problem. Hi, thank you for your presentation. My name is Ashley. I work at Trees for the Future. I was wondering if you surveyed on any issues related to land tenure and constraints of how youth in agriculture participate with constricted land tenure, especially along gender lines, and then how that relates to financial inclusion. So if people don't have land, they might not be able to have access to financial services, and I'm wondering about your survey and the relationship from your perspective.
Okay, we have one here. And then that will be the last question over there.
Yeah, Edward Winter, World Vision. Just a quick question. You displayed kind of the monetary, like the cash value of what people received. Did you also calculate the kind of the monetary value of the crops, for example, for self-consumption? Because I'm interested in seeing whether the money itself, or having money itself, was a motivation for pursuing a particular livelihood, or whether it was more an overall livelihood assessment.
Okay, we've got one last question over there.
Thank you. Thomas Tarus, also from World Vision.
Oh, great.
My question will go both to Professor Dr. David and Tricia. Dr. David, you talked about dynamic change number 2, globalization of information, aspirations, and values. And from Tricia's presentation, that was awesome. There is something that I still don't get coming out. The issue of the education system. I read somewhere that previously the education system was about people going out and starting something. And then big firms came up and they wanted people to work in their companies. And so they influenced and changed the education system to make it look like getting employed in a white-collar job is the best thing in life you can do. Then people started getting employed, and then the employment market is flooded. So at what point are we as players in this space going to influence and strike a balance between that kind of approach in education system and also trying to bring back people to see that agriculture and food development is important as well, because we have population growth, production is diminishing. So, and maybe that's why Obama said this is something that may never be resolved. So maybe we need to look at that as well. So that's the question one. So how do we take advantage of this communication change to start talking about behavior change in agricultural production, not only in the health system? And the second one is about what you didn't actually address what the lady asked about, some of the challenges, land access, capital startup for the youth, and etc. that needs to be looked at when we talk about youth involvement. Thank you.
Well, that's sure a bunch of good questions. I'm glad it's not me who has to answer them. Tricia, why don't you give it a shot?
No, thank you, everyone. Those are fabulous questions. And if I don't answer them to your sufficient satisfaction, I'm happy to talk over break or over lunch. Thanks for the comment about Catherine Bertini. I was actually with her yesterday at an event, so I am going to look up that report. And part of our new strategy is definitely building a gender strategy. I think it's one of the learning curves we have as an organization. I think we've always been committed to meeting young women, but certainly like bringing our knowledge and evidence together on that needs further development. And going younger, at what age point, and at what point are we best suited as a foundation? I think it's something we talk a lot about where we can make a transformative impact and what's maybe best left to other people. But so that's certainly, thank you for that. In terms of the question about age definition, we were using the UN definition in our youth livelihoods work at the time we commissioned this report, which is 18 to 24, as you know. Since then, we've expanded it to meet the African Union definition in most African governments up to age 35. So within that, I think we are trying to drill down into what do different youth need at different points in their transition. You saw that a bit in the video, and that's some of the analysis that, quite frankly, sometimes it was a muddy picture. Like we couldn't clearly conclude what was, what did an 18-year-old need versus a 24-year-old. There are many more research questions coming out of this than I've probably answered. In terms of the vocational training, that's something that didn't really come out of this research so much as a lot of other work we've done. And again, thinking about where we're best placed to make a difference. We do have some projects that's looked at vocational training, and it's frankly, one of the needs we see to have the vocational training systems better respond to labor market systems so that, those are more integrated. Happy to talk more about that. In terms of the land tenure question, this isn't something we specifically looked at in this research, just frankly because of the scope, and the methods didn't really lend themselves to it. But we do have some other interesting work on land tenure that was conducted for us by the Overseas Development Institute, ODI, so feel free to Google it. I think at least there's a report on Ghana that is, if not on their website, it should be coming out soon. So that is in the works. The monetary value of crops, great question. I mean, to be honest, asking young people about their money flows, even within 2 weeks, as a researcher, it was very unsatisfying to me to be able to, how much do I trust this self-reported data? And this is one of the exciting things about more digital money and things. You can't lie, right? Not that it's lying, but it's what self-reported behavior and money is really hard to get a handle on. That's one of the reasons why we asked them about time, and actually we found we kind of had to throw that data out because we just couldn't rely on it, the quality of reported time activities. So we didn't look at the monetary value of consumption. We do talk more about in the report itself about how, a lot of the crops and horticulture activities were, designed for consumption activities, and actually people reported negative income, so they showed a loss on those activities, but obviously there was a value in terms of the food that was produced. And in terms of the skills mismatch, yes, I don't think it's an either-or question. I think it's a both-and. We need to be looking at skills at the higher end of the spectrum as well as at, the more basic, people with primary education. So, it's part of our challenge. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, but...
A couple comments, one on land and then one on this wage versus self-employment activities. So I'll start with the last. So you really captured, I think the survey data captures this pluri-activity, which many people refer to it, but yours reflects even more than you find in the quantitative data, which is maybe not surprising. But that pluri-activity extends to people that do have good reliable full-time wage jobs, even high-paying wage jobs. They use that money to invest in small poultry operations, small horticultural operations. They buy land back, where they grew up and so forth. So pluriactivity is embedded even among people who have well-paying, formal sector wage jobs. On the land issue, kind of two things. One is that the increased life expectancy I'm talking mostly about Africa now with the rise in life expectancy there and elsewhere. But in Africa, it is leading to problems for youth to receive their inheritance in land, okay? And this is causing some difficulties for youth getting into agriculture. And yet, when you look at the data, both the data and then informal work with focus groups, you see a rise of land rental markets. And that's echoed then in the responses that we had in interviews that we were doing in Tanzania and in Nigeria, that even if youth didn't have the resources to purchase land or hadn't received land yet from their parents, that they could get access to land in a fairly reliable way through land rental markets. So this kind of the policy that allows that to happen is an important aspect of facilitating youth entry into farming.
So great. I think you've now discovered that we have two knowledgeable resources here on the podium who've presented in different ways, different aspects of the youth story in rural areas in low-income countries, and I would encourage you to follow up with them during the break. We're over time, unfortunately. That almost always happens, but we're going to try to get back on schedule if at all possible, because we've got webinars going and whatever. So we're taking a break now, and we're going to ask you to take just a 15-minute break, if you would be so kind. We'd like to try to get back here. The schedule says 11:25. If we can make it no later than 11:30, 11:25. I don't know. Can we make 11:25? Let's try to make 11:25 and see what we can do. There's coffee and over there, and there are restrooms back there, and also down the stairs, and to the left, I believe, down the stairs. Okay, so let's have that break that we all need and come right back. Thanks.